everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Texas Women Photographers Circle. This is our monthly meetup. Here with me this evening are moderators Leslie Sessoms, and she's based in the DFW area. So tonight, she's kind of in the tornado zone. So if we lose her, I've given her instructions to run, don't walk, just leave the computer. Then Sue Pitts is here. Sue is in Georgetown, and Sue just joined the team about 2 weeks ago. And returning to help us moderate is Charlie Hickman, who took a little break from us, but she is based in San Antonio. Every month, I invite a guest speaker to share their photography and some of their favorite tips and techniques to help us all improve our photography and to stoke our creativity. The schedule for upcoming presentations is on my website at lindanickell.com, as well as the links to previous sessions on YouTube. Tonight's guest is Lori Lankford. Lori is a Maryland-based nature photographer. Lori's lifelong passion for gardening, especially flowers, has fueled her creativity and her love for teaching. Lori hosts in-person and online classes. She's a contributor to ICM Photo Magazine, and her work has been published in various print and digital mediums. But in tonight's presentation, Creative Flowerscapes, Lori's going to talk about some of her favorite techniques to help you photograph flowers and gardens. She'll touch on working with natural light and capturing macro and larger scale garden scenes. If you're on Instagram, look for her at photography_Lori. And you can connect with her through her website, LoriLankford.com. Lori, it's nice to have you here, and thank you for accepting my invitation to come and talk to this group.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and to see some familiar faces and some new people as well. So I was telling Linda earlier, I was in Texas for over 10 years, and it's still a big part of my heart. And so glad to be with many of you Texans tonight.
Well, I'm glad to have you. And I was recently in the DC area, and you reached out to me. And also, I did not mention this because I kind of forgot, but you're a moderator, aren't you, for the Maryland Women's Photography Circle? There's actually a handful of moderators in the room tonight, but are you the only moderator for Maryland? I don't know.
No, it's Maryland, DC, and Regina Boston, who's a Lynn's Baby ambassador as well, co-moderates with me.
Oh, great. Well, I'm glad to have you here. And I was snooping on your website, and I've told you, like before we started, one day I will be tiptoeing through your garden on Main Street because it looks like something that I would love to do. But for now, I'm happy to look at your photos and listen to some of your wonderful tips because I personally need some. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started.
Well, again, so great to be with you guys tonight. And I am going to try to pause throughout and see if there's any questions. But if there's something critical, I know that one of the moderators will have me pause. And I'm so excited to share with you about one of my passions, flower photography. So Linda shared a lot about me. This is a little view of a peek of my dahlia garden. Last year, I started renovating a new garden. We moved from Virginia to Maryland, and we had a clean slate. It was a restored Victorian home, but there was nothing but dirt. So we've been restoring that, and it's just been a labor of love, and it is now my place to shoot and to share with others. I do workshops in my garden and also in the DC area. And I was really proud this past year. I was shortlisted with 3 images in the International Garden Photographer of the Year competition. And while I didn't make the final cut, it's such an honor to even be shortlisted. And they were related to gardens, and I'll highlight some of those images tonight, but I was really excited about that. I'll also share with you some of the places that these images are in case you're in the DC area. Some are also in different botanic gardens across mainly the US. And so this is from scenes from one of my absolute all-time favorite garden areas, which is Dunbarton Oaks Garden in the DC area. And it's just absolutely stunning and has a whole story. I could do a whole webinar just on this space. It's very historic. If you're into history of landscape and architecture design, it's fantastic. So when we think about flower landscapes, we really want to think about 3 ways that we can capture, especially if you visit a garden or a nature center. First is really thinking about just close up, taking a subject and zooming in to really see all its features. And it really gives you a sense of what you're looking at. The great thing about shooting close up is you can really use any lens. You can zoom in, you can physically get close with a shorter lens. Or, again, use a telephoto or even a macro, but it's where you're just capturing something in a little bit closer. And a lot of my images are more close up because I like to showcase the beauty of the light and more of the full scene. You can also do macro, and macro is where you're shooting 1-to-1. It really allows you to fill the frame and to focus on just minute details. It does require a macro lens, or a zoom lens where you can have a very, very short focal distance to your subject. So there are more and more lenses coming out that way, and macro is very, very fun, but it can be also challenging, especially out in a real garden setup. The other that I want to talk about tonight as well is intimate landscapes. So we've all probably shot those grand big landscapes, but intimate is where you're getting smaller sections. And I find it can be really challenging, especially when you visit a garden. There's so much to see and explore. And so it's about telling a story, taking some little sections that you see and how to put the scene together, thinking about the textures, the color, the setting. And with that, you really need a wider angle lens. But again, you can shoot it with just about any type except maybe a true macro lens. So I want to encourage you tonight as we explore this topic to think about when you go visit a place like this, or even it could be your own backyard, it could be a friend's, it could be a large botanic garden, how to think about the full story, the close-up scenes, the macro, and those intimate landscapes. So that's what we're going to dive into tonight. So I have some images here, and I would consider this a little bit more close up. This was just the bee looks larger than life. He was so big and happy. And this was out in my garden with a zinnia. And I just loved the light with this. And this will be a true macro. So just getting in really close. And I will talk about post-processing just a little bit at the end, but I will preface by saying some of my images, you may notice a painterly look. You may notice some texture. I really do a combination. Some images I keep really clean and just use Lightroom, but some images I do like to add some creative effects. And I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. This is a scene in Charleston, South Carolina, at one of the gardens. And again, just more of that intimate view and capturing the gorgeous azaleas that bloom there in early spring. So thinking about those more intimate scenes. So I want to start by giving you some garden tips for when you visit a place, because as much as it's about how you shoot and what you shoot, there's also some tips for when you're in a garden. And I've learned these over the years. So as I've shot in many, many locations and really grown in my skill set, I think there's some important things to think about. So if it's the first time you're visiting a place, I really encourage you to walk around. Explore the gardens, maybe even before you pull out your camera. Just get familiar with the space. What is interesting about the location? Most gardens really do tell a story, and there will be different intimate scenes that you may gather from that garden space. There are different ways that the garden designers create the space. As you're walking, look for those small scenes. It may be a bench. It could be the way there's some sculptures in the garden or the way the light hits certain areas. So look for those scenes that you may want to capture. Also think about positioning as you're walking in the garden. So shadows are critical when we're working outdoors. You can intentionally capture shadows, but most of the time in our garden images, we don't want distracting shadows. So you have to really think about those. And I think it's the one key thing that when I teach students in the garden, I'm teaching them to manage the light and manage those shadows. We also have to be patient. So it's really, really hard to go to such a grand, beautiful place, or even in your own backyard, and you've got tons of things blooming and you want to capture all of it. Or maybe there's lots of butterflies and bumblebees, but really taking your time and getting, working your subject and getting some great images versus just tons of snapshots is so much better. It does sometimes think, oh, I'm not going to capture all of this, but just being patient. We also have to wait for wildlife and insects. So just because they buzz and fly away, just wait. Most of the time they're going to come back and then you're in position and you're ready. So I've learned to really be patient, and I really see the garden as part of my well-being practice and my kind of just relaxation as well and well-being. And so just pausing and enjoying the scene, and typically the insects will come back and you'll capture them. Taking multiple compositions, which we're going to talk about composition in a minute, working with the light because light is so critical. And one of my other top tips is there is no bad light. And I know there could be times that you may go out at noon. And for those of you in Texas, it's bright, it's sunny, big skies, even here in Maryland, but there's no bad light. We can use the light and we can use some tools to shoot even at high noon, and working with your light and your equipment. Try different lenses, shoot close up, landscape, and then I want us to really think about how to tell a story. So those are some just kind of quick tips. Two of my little bug images from my garden this summer, and these were just, hovering around and buzzing. These moths just love the zinnias, and I just had so fun capturing their little faces and the colors, and just getting in close, and again, taking my time. I could spend an hour just watching these guys and shooting. So I wanted to start with just some tools to capture. So as we talk about this variety from macro all the way to intimate landscapes, you can really use any lens. You can use the macro for true macro. My favorite lenses out in the garden, I really go towards two of my favorites. And one would be my macro 85. And then I have a zoom that's a 70-300, and I love it out in the garden because I can stand back and I can really get in close and not disturb things in the garden. I can also compress the light, and it's just, even though it's a heavier lens, it is really fun. If you're visiting a botanic garden, you often can't get really close to some of the plants. And so just this past weekend, I went out to a local garden, and that was the only lens I took with me. And I just walked and was able to zoom in to shoot things that were not right at the pathways. Tripods are often not allowed. So sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. You want to check that before you go. And if you have to use a tripod, absolutely. If it's allowed, use it. But try to get comfortable hand holding when you can. Extension tubes can be handy if you don't have a macro lens. A shooting stool, a clamp, a diffuser. So I'm going to show you, I have an Amazon store, and I'm just going to show you a couple of these tools that I use. So this is a little stool, and it's handy because it pops up and collapses. So I love this. I use it indoors. I use it in my own garden, and I take it with me sometimes. I love this little Joby small tripod. It can come in really handy when you can't take your big one, but you can maybe sneak and pop that out really fast. Extension tubes, of course. And I think in here somewhere, it's probably on showing more, but there's the clamp tool, which is like a curved tool that you can attach to plants. Now, you can't always use that out in a garden, but sometimes you can use it, in your home garden and in places like that. So I'll have the link to this will be to my Amazon store if you want to see some of those products that I like to use when I'm out capturing. So some settings. Of course, focal point is really critical when you're shooting close up and even for those intimate scenes. I like to keep my camera on spot focus and I control where the focus point is. Now, I'm not shooting wildlife typically that's flying around, or I don't shoot a lot of people. So I really can control in a garden setting where I want that focus to be. I often shoot really wide open. So most things are going to be f2.8 to f4. But if I really want more detail and my background is manageable, I will take it up to get that detail. Manual focus can come in handy, especially for close up if you're really struggling or with macro, so that you can really find that focus point if needed. The key, though, I think is really, again, directing the eye where you want the eye to go in the scene. And another tip with settings is just know your lens's minimum focus distance, because that can come in handy. If you have a lens that allows you to get really close, you could throw that on if you need to, even if you don't have a macro lens. So often when I'm out teaching, students will be struggling with focus, and it's because they're physically getting close, but their camera's too close to really nail that focus. So just know that distance and it will really, really make an impact. So these are some examples where I shot this image a lot softer, probably at lower than f4. It has some good detail, but also just the soft light in the background. And this was in my garden. There was lots of things back there, but shooting it again with the soft bokeh and the light and getting some detail. Now this rose, I was able to come in and shoot at probably f6 or even a little bit higher, because I wanted the detail and I could get most of the scene filling the frame and not worry about the background. And it wasn't in a lot of light, so it was in a really darker setting. Some objects here where I shot this on the left, fern, really definitely at 2.8, just focusing on the water drops and just wanting this to be really abstract and soft. And the same thing with this little fiddle fig head just coming in. And this image on the right was shot with the zoom lens. So I was able to zoom into it, but keep everything soft behind. And an example on the left at the Chicago Botanic Garden at their Lily Pond area, which is so incredible, trying to get a lot of the detail. So definitely a higher f-stop versus my dahlia, just a little bit softer. And this was with actually using some scrapbook paper behind the flower to bring out the blue versus the white tones. So scrapbook paper is handy sometimes, especially if you're at home in a garden, to be able to put behind. And I'll use it when I teach sometimes as well. So light, we know, is super critical in photography, but especially with close up. And I primarily shoot almost over 90% natural light. In the winter, I do play indoors, but I still use window light. I'm just a natural light photographer. I learned flash. I'll pull it out every now and then, but I just love the look of natural light. The key, though, again, is eliminating shadows. And the biggest way to do that is actually moving yourself or using a diffuser. And I just encourage you to get really good at shooting in any type of light. I used to struggle with light and I would get frustrated. Oh, I can't shoot at this time of day. And then I was like, nope, I'm here. I'm going to make the best of it. And so it's figuring out how to move around, how to go to the shaded areas in a garden, but how to use the light to enhance your scenes and your subject, and just managing your settings. So an image with some beautiful light. I love to shoot into the light. So I am always looking for the light. This was an image I just took this weekend, and I went to a shaded area in the garden to shoot these hellebores, Lenten roses. And the sun was filtering through a bunch of evergreens. And so it was just beautiful bokeh and kind of backlighting these hellebores. And so the story is as much about the flowers as it is the light, because I was just like, oh, it's just so warm and beautiful when we've just been going through winter. So I wanted to give you one of my oops images here on the left. This is one of the hellebores I shot this weekend. And as soon as I shot it, I knew I just could not, was by myself. It was so bright out, and it's still, it's winter here. The trees are not filtering. And I got this shadow right here. And it's just, I didn't get the focus good. It was just too bright. I didn't have a diffuser with me because I just packed light and just went out. I tried to move myself around. I wish I'd had a hat or an umbrella. So a couple things to think about when you go out is have something, even if it's in your car, that you can diffuse light with. A lot of times I'll take a big sun hat and I can use that. You can use one of those hand fans, an umbrella, or a true diffuser that photographers use can work great because you can hold it up while you're shooting. The image on the right was taken the same day and it was still bright, but I was able to block this flower with my body and I could get close enough to shoot it and not have the distracting shadows. So while I got several images I liked on Sunday, I had a lot that I just could not manage the shadows with. And again, I wasn't prepared, but just wanted you to see that. And I think that's what happens a lot of times is we're trying to navigate the light. And so we really have to find a way with your body to move, get the composition, and just look for those shadows, and also looking in your four corners to see if there's something distracting in your images. So I'll pause there for just a second. Linda, any critical questions before I talk about intimate scenes?
No, nothing critical. I'm going to hold those.
Okay, great. So intimate scenes are one of my favorites. As much as I love close up, I really like to challenge myself because I think it's challenging to find these stories in such big spaces. It can be easy to go out and you've got a grand vista that you can shoot. You still have to manage your settings and the light, but to find little nuggets, and I like to challenge myself with that. If you haven't studied gardens, I've over the years I have, and I've read lots of books. Garden designers create rooms. And so when you visit a garden, you'll notice, there's the succulent section or the wildflowers or the English garden. But there's also, in many historic garden spaces, they're truly rooms, and the designers created them that way. And so when you think of it that way, I think it helps you when you're walking through. So think about capturing the scale of the space. Look for colors, texture, and again, just directing the eye where you want it to go. So this is again at Dumbarton Oaks in the summer in their rose garden, which is just amazing. This is an image in the English walled garden at the Chicago Botanic Garden, which is absolutely amazing. And this was one of the images that the International Garden Photographer of the Year did a whole series this year on Chicago. And this was one of my images from there. Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania is luckily very close to me, and Longwood is just an amazing garden and very, very different because it is a showcase garden. And I always say it's like going to Disney World at a garden. It's absolutely incredible. And it's very challenging to photograph because it's so big, the scale's so huge. And so you have to really work to find little intimate scenes to capture. And this is at the heart, a little bit right before spring, they have the anemones out and they're just incredible. This is at Mount Cuba in let's see, is it Delaware or Pennsylvania? Anyway, it's up there. I think it might be on the Delaware Pennsylvania line, but just a beautiful nature center. It was rated one of the top gardens in the US by USA World a couple years ago, and it is just stunning. It's an all natural native plant garden, and just loved this little intimate scene. There were little benches throughout the garden for you just to sit and enjoy. So finding those little intimate spaces is one way to create some beautiful intimate scene images. This was shot with a Lens Baby lens. I don't use Lens Baby a whole lot anymore. I use it occasionally, but just felt that this scene really warranted it. It's just in the heat of summer in a late afternoon, just all the wildflowers kind of growing in this little building, and just really just a fun little nugget. This is a grander scale of that rose garden. So an example of something a little bit larger, but trying to position all these beds in the frame and the composition. And I hit really the jackpot this day. This is a true sky. I did not replace it. It was just a perfect day. And so beautiful at this gorgeous space here. And another nugget, this is a bench that is there at that garden. And just trying to capture these. So let me take you for just a second. I want to go back over, and on my website, I have a section under my gallery that says, of course, I've lost it right now. It is, let me go back, garden stories. And I have it where I create a story based on the gardens that I visited. And so it's an opportunity for me to talk about the garden, to write about it. I like to write, but also to put my images together in a way that flows like a story. And I started doing this because it actually helped me when I was shooting. If I thought about it as how would I put this together? And so if you're into kind of collections and galleries and stories, that might be a method that helps you when you're visiting a place that's so large and shooting it. So I have several gardens on here that I visited, and I continue to kind of add to it as I go. So it's one way that I have found really helps me capture the places that I visit, and think about the close-up images, the macro, and those intimate scenes. This is another one at Dumbarton, the gorgeous roses in this little house and this path. So little pathways, little spaces that you can get down low and compose. This is actually at Winterthur Gardens, and it is just an incredible nature space as well. So when I teach garden and creative photography workshops, I always talk about composition. I just don't feel like you can talk about photography and not cover composition. I really believe it's the difference between just a snapshot and a really great photo. And with close-up and macro, you really have to adjust and move to find a composition that really works. Always, of course, checking for the light, looking at the four corners of your image if you're shooting close so that you don't cut off a petal, or I always say it's just like shooting a person. You don't want to cut off the top of the head or one arm. You want the crop to be really intentional. And you also want to try different perspectives. That's the biggest key. So when I teach, I give this little bingo card about composition, and just really thinking about some different methods, whether it's perspective, bird's eye or worm's eye, looking at leading lines, how they move through the scene, thinking about negative space. In gardens, that's a great way to really give the emotion of the space, is using some negative space. Of course, filling the frame can be very dramatic, creating spirals in your images. There's just some different ideas. And this is a collage of various images using different types of composition. So shooting from behind, especially if you have beautiful light, can really showcase the petals in your close-up images. Filling kind of 3/4 of the frame, filling the frame, leading lines, getting down low to really show how those petals are reaching up, little branches. So just different perspectives. And so what I like to do is I start kind of just taking a shot straight on, and I kind of feel out my subject. Like, is this really going to work? Is the lighting good? How do I feel about the subject? And if I'm feeling good and like, this is kind of interesting, then I'll start moving around and trying some different things to see what may work. It also gives you a chance to explore your subject. So I'm sure many of you have shot, maybe photographed people, little kids. You have to get to know the little kids, and you're exploring with them as you're photographing them. And it's very similar in nature. So just taking your time to see, because usually it's the fourth or fifth shot that's going to stick versus the first one or two. Usually once you've explored a little bit more. So let's talk about some of my favorite creative techniques. Shooting through things, free lensing, intentional camera movement, multiple exposure, and of course, post-processing can be a way to add some creativity. So I'm going to just talk you through several of the images. So I absolutely love intentional camera movement. I made that a personal project of mine about 6 years ago, and I really studied it and worked on it. And just a couple years ago, I started doing it with close-up things. So this image on the left is a dahlia, and I actually shooting ICM close-up can be really challenging. But I've enjoyed learning and working through ICM photography, and it works great with grasses and greenery and plants. So this was a large palm that I captured with it. So free lensing, if you haven't tried it, it's where you actually remove your lens from your camera, and you usually shoot with like a 50 millimeter. And as you hold the lens to the body, you tilt it so that you're letting in light. There are some great YouTube videos about free lensing if you're interested in it at all, but it just gives this magical softness and blur. It's not easy to get the first time, and if I even tried to do it right now, like I'd have to really work at it, but it can just be really beautiful. I love to use free lensing in the spring. The colors are so vibrant in spring, and the softness of the flowers and trees, that it just, I think, really works nicely. So free lensing can be fun if you're comfortable shooting without your lens on your camera. Some more intentional camera movement. So think about intentional camera movement. We usually do it, panning of water, or maybe, upward movement of trees, but you can do it with wildflowers. That's the image on the left, and the image on the right is some grasses. Now, these were actually green grasses, but I picked up the colors from the garden that were behind it. And just the movement of the grasses was so beautiful in the light. Now, if your camera does a multiple exposure in camera, most cameras do nowadays, it can be so much fun. If not, you can still do this technique. You just have to use a program like Photoshop or something similar to layer your images. So the left was in Charleston last spring, just 2 images overlaid on top of each other in camera. And when you do multiple exposure in camera, there are several blend modes. You can use the average, but I encourage you guys to try the one that's called dark. The dark is going to emphasize the dark areas of your image, and it can really help you. That's what I did on this image on the right, was in the Chicago, outside the history, not the History Museum, the Museum of Art in Chicago, this fall. It was like the last day of fall. These leaves were falling fast. And I just did 2 images overlaid really tightly, but I did the setting for dark, and so it emphasized the tree branches. And a lot of people don't change that setting, they just stick with average. And I find that the dark one works really nice, or average can work well. This is one I just did. We've got spring trees blooming here in Maryland and DC. It's very early, and I'm working on a personal photo project to capture spring, imitating the artist David Hockney, who he paints on an iPad, but he does a whole thing on spring and has done it for several years. And they're just stunning, stunning paintings. And so I want to do a project kind of imitating that this year. So this was just 2 exposures, one over the other. And then I did some artistic painting in Photoshop. So this image on the left was actually shot through a glass vase. So think about shooting through subjects, especially at home, to get some creativity, or if you're out, in a garden where you can take something with you and shoot through it. So the image on the right was shot through some lace. So that's where I had the lace around. You just kind of wrap it around your lens. You can bring it out a little bit, and it gives that soft look. You can also wrap your entire lens. You can use nylon pantyhose. You can use a filter, and then maybe a lot of people put Vaseline. I don't too much like that method. I'm probably too messy, but I love doing the lace or tulle, the like dancer fabric. And you can just tie it and then bring it out as much as you want around your lens. And it just gives a softness and can really be fun to use. Again, I love it in the springtime. I think with the brightness of the flowers, it just gives a nice, soft look. But shooting through glass, shooting through different things like that can be beautiful. So this was again shooting with, this was actually using a copper tube. So if you go to the hardware store, you can get gold colored, silver colored little like plumbing tubes, or you can purchase copper ones. I do have a link on my Amazon store for the copper tubing that you can purchase on Amazon, unless you have someone handy that can get you a piece of copper tubing. But it just makes a gorgeous glow. You do have to put the tube facing the light, and you're shooting really into the light because that's the only way to get that reflection in the tubing. So that's how I'm getting this softness all the way around. These are little crabapple balloons, and I can't wait for them to bloom in a few weeks. But the copper tubes can be really fun to work with. You're just holding it right to your lens and tilting it, and make sure you're shooting again into the light. So post-processing can be a lot of fun if you enjoy it. And so just thinking about adding some whimsy. This image was shot with a lens baby, I think the Sol 45. So it's got that fun technique around the edges, but I added some additional oil paint. And this is from a view at the Chicago Botanic Garden, right when you walk in. And this is an example of, this was just a sweet little flower that I'd captured in the garden, but decided to add some extra twirl and spin using Photoshop, just to give it a little more whimsy. And as if it was dancing, I like to make them dance in a breeze. This image was another one from the International Garden Photographer that I had submitted. This image, I added some, I did do a little bit of correcting on the butterfly. This butterfly's wings were a little bit tattered, not too much, but adding some oil paint. And I did emphasize this light. So I added a gradient just to make it a little bit stronger. I was definitely shooting, it was right at sunset. The light was beautiful, but just added just a tiny bit more. And then adding some oil paint to just give a little texture and just make it look real painterly. I just felt like this was just such a beautiful, beautiful scene and beautiful butterfly hanging out. Some examples again of just, you know, a standard little flower, and again adding some fun whimsy. A scene where this was in Charleston, and you can't probably tell a whole lot in the trees, but just adding again some painting techniques. This I think was edited using Topaz Studio 2. If you have Topaz Studio 2, it's a great program. Unfortunately, Topaz is not continuing to support that program, and I think it's almost impossible to get it. I don't think you can purchase it anymore, so I don't like to talk about it, but if you have it, it's an incredible tool for painting. This little spring bluebell flower, I just tried to do this circle with, and I just loved how it turned out. So I did a blur, a radial blur, and then mask out and brought back the flower, just again for some fun and whimsy. And the irises, so this was an intentional camera movement shot. I actually took a static image, and then I took an intentional camera movement image and then combined them in Photoshop so that I could bring out more details of the iris, but make the leaves more of that camera movement look, just to make it very painterly and very soft. So then I just brought back out what I wanted in the iris. So some more different images. I do want to share that I have a workshop. It's a webinar through the Women's Photography Circle group. It's coming up in June. And in that, we're going to do nothing but talk about editing flowers. I'm going to share kind of my process for selecting which flowers I edit, my 3-step easy process to clean up an image, to paint an image, to add some creative effects. And then I'm going to walk you through some advanced techniques using embossing, some very different techniques to create just some really magical images. So that webinar, it is a register and it does have a small fee. It'll be a 2-hour to be recorded and a lot of fun. So if you're interested in editing, especially florals, feel free to join me. And then I want to share, I love to teach and to share. And I started a YouTube channel years ago when I would have to post a video for a course or for a student. And over the years, it's grown. And so I do a couple videos, about 3, sometimes I'm up to 4 videos a month. And it's typically almost all editing. Some will be something new that I'm doing in my studio or out in my garden. It's all photography related. And so if you're interested, feel free to check that out. It's Lori Lankford Photography, and my YouTube code is 5574. And they give you a little handle there, but you can just find me, Lori Lankford Photography. And I would welcome any subscribers. I am getting close. I think I'm over 700, getting close to the 1,000 mark. And that's the kind of the mark for YouTube. And then it kind of makes it all worthwhile. But I just enjoy doing it. And I've got webinars out there as well as editing videos. And then I just want to thank you guys for having me tonight. I really want to open it up to any questions about what I've covered and anything that I can share with you about shooting out in the garden.
Great, Lori. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to take your screen down and I'm going to hit you with a handful of questions that came in for you. Right off the bat, Linda was wondering, do you use a tripod or do you most often?
90, gosh, probably, I don't know. I'll say 95% of the time, no tripod. Now, if I am wanting, camellias are one of my favorite flowers. And if I'm wanting to get all that gorgeous detail, because a white camellia is like a big marshmallow, you can't get that detail. And I would take my tripod. So there are sometimes I will take it to the garden with me. The main reason I don't, and I shoot with short fixed lenses that aren't heavy, because I want to move around my subject. I want to find those nuggets of interest and I really work my light. And I think that is the biggest thing you just can't do with a tripod. I do a couple workshops in the late summer. I grow dahlias and I do dahlia workshops at my home. And this next year, I'm saying no tripods because the students with the tripods miss out. They can't maneuver. They're not getting the light. It's just really, really hard. So if you're not steady, I would encourage you to try to find a shorter lens that you could hold and be able to use out in the garden. It will just bring so much more joy to the process. I just promise you.
Okay, so this is another question from Liz. Do you ever use a macro app with an iPhone?
Oh, so I have had the macro lenses that go on the iPhone, and I do have the iPhone where you can do macro. I don't do a lot with I don't do as much with my iPhone as I probably should or could. I'll take sometimes larger scenes. But again, I shoot with, I switched from Canon to Fuji, and I again use those shorter, really lightweight lenses when I can. Now, sometimes I've got right now my Beast 70-300 on and I'll pull it out. But yeah, I don't use a whole lot with my iPhone.
So I'm not real sure what slide she was referring to, but let's take an image that's got a grand vista. Jamie's curious, where do you focus? And then what type of depth of field what do you aim for?
Yeah, so some of those larger, like the big rose garden, I definitely would have taken it up to probably f8, maybe f11. And I'm trying to find where do I want the eye to go. So for example, in that image, it was kind of more of a diagonal because those rose beds went that way. So I was trying to find a focus point out in the rose garden because the trees weren't interesting. It's the roses. So I'm thinking about that. If I was shooting something that was over to the left and then the garden went out, but I wanted the bench to be in focus, then of course I would focus there. So I'm really thinking about the scene, and I usually try a couple different things to see what looks best. I look at the back of the camera. How does it feel? Does it feel balanced? And I just try several different things, because when you get home and you pull it up, it all looks a little bit different.
Right. Bridget says, I love your icy image of the dahlia. Can you tell her what the shutter speed that you find works well for those close-up ICM images?
Yeah, so I don't use a filter very often at all. And I know a lot of ICM photographers do. Again, I keep things really simple, you guys.
That's
I'm
great.
just, yeah. So even in bright light, I will do ICM. Now, sometimes I have to adjust, but for most things, at least, 1/30th of a second up to really 1/2 is a sweet spot, a half a second. But some things, when I've looked at the settings, 1/30th, 1/2, I just test it to see what I can get away with and still get my exposure where it's not completely blown out, but usually it will be overexposed, but it's still where I can adjust it. It's not so blown out that it's going to be a throwaway image. What I do is I always max out my f-stop. So I'm at 22 or whatever the highest you have. And then I'm working the movement as fast as I need to get the exposure and working that shutter speed.
Okay. Leticia is asking, have you ever used the light setting in your camera for multiple exposures?
Yes. So the bright or light setting, what it's going to do is emphasize the bright parts. And so it can make your image look like it has holes in it or lace. So I did one this fall where it was a whole thing of fall trees, and I overlaid another set of trees, and I did it on that light. And so it brought just the leaves in. So it looked like just multiple leaves. It was beautiful. So what it does is it highlights the whites. And so your dark areas will not be, they almost will have holes in them. So it can absolutely work and be really beautiful.
Okay, so this is a twofer. This is on the copper tube. First question is, what size is the copper tube that you use? And then can you describe how you use the copper tube again? So
Yes. So the copper tube, it's by Supply Giant, and it's called Supply Giant. It's a 2-inch copper coupling, 2-inch, and it's $8 on Amazon. It's gone down. It had gone up as high as $11 and it's gone back down. It's the best place to get it because it's not rough on the edges. I had a friend who got someone to cut some for me for my workshops, and they're a little rough on the edges. So if you want one, I would splurge. Supply Giant on Amazon. So to use it, what I do is you're going to hold it, and I usually put my finger on my lens and I'm holding the tube so I don't hit my lens with it. So you don't want to hit your lens. If you've got a filter on your lens, a UV or something, that's better, but those things are still expensive. So I kind of just hold it, and then you're tilting it. So you're shooting into the light. So you want to find a subject that's kind of down, but you have to have sunlight coming into that tube, because that's going to give you the soft glow and the reflection. And what happens is the color of the flower will reflect through that tube and just gives it this beautiful glow. So it might have a little purple hue, pink hue, and then the copper hue. But it has to be into the light. And so you've got to get yourself positioned. Usually if I'm in the garden, I might have to get down on both knees, and I get steady. I put my arms really close to my body, and I get as steady as I can. And then I have that tube tilted so the light is coming into the tube. My flower is probably in the shade, but the tube's facing the sun.
Donna's got a question about the iris multiple exposure image. She's wondering, was it ICM handheld or were you using a tripod?
I only do ICM handheld. because again, I want to control the movements. A lot of times I'm moving my whole body. So I did an upward. I love to do that with iris, things that are really straight. So when you see something in the garden, whether it's flowers, just a whole slew of straight wildflowers, or you've got grasses that are angled, then swipe angled. If it's a, iris is growing straight up, swipe up, and all that iris foliage is just going to be so beautiful. And then what I did is I brought out the iris blooms from a static image in post-processing.
Okay. This is kind of a good question for some people that don't know. Can you offer some tips? Well, first of all, how do you create bokeh, and do you have any tips or favorite lenses?
Yeah, so bokeh, it is easier with I would say easier with a macro lens or with a lens that's like 85 to 105. I used to shoot with the Sigma 105 art, and oh, I loved that lens. It's a little clinky, but oh, the most beautiful bokeh. I loved it. And I almost kept my Canon because of it. It's a great lens if you're looking for one. But the 70 to 300, a long lens, is going to give you compression of the background. So that's why a lot of portrait photographers, they use longer lenses. So everything behind your subject and the light is going to just get compressed, and it's like it just makes it glow. So that helps. An 85 to 105 works great. But you're really shooting almost into the light. Now, not your subject may not be, but you're positioning yourself to where you're shooting your subject without those shadows and without the harsh highlights, but you're facing the light. And usually it's light that's filtered. So what I encourage you to do, and this is what I do when I teach, you're looking for a place where maybe your subject is in the shadow, like I did with those hellebores, but the sunlight is coming through a bush, trees, anything in nature is filtering the light, especially at like our height, or if you're bending down. And that's where the bokeh is. If you think about fairy light, that's what we're looking for. And so sometimes people, when I'm in class, they don't want to shoot in the shade. I have to like strong arm them. Come on, come with me. Because we might be shooting in the shade, but we look and we're seeing the sunlight coming through, and that's going to give you the bokeh. So next time you're out, look through a tree that's got filtered sunlight, especially like early evening, and you're going to see bokeh. It will be there. It's like the magical fairy lights. Hope that helps.
I think so. That was actually a very good explanation. All right, last question that I'm seeing. It's a little bit of a selfish question for Jamie, but can you recommend, or do you know of any one garden that you shouldn't miss if you're in Charleston?
Oh gosh, in Charleston, South Carolina?
Hmm?
Yes, it's a drive, a little bit of a drive, but it's so worth it. So Brook Green Gardens is up at Murals Inlet at the beach, and it is absolutely beautiful. It's historic. It has the rooms, it's got sculptures. It's stunning, and it's not crowded. The other would be Magnolia is a tourist spot, so I don't go there anymore. I went once, but it's not if you're going to go with a group and you want to go, but it's too crowded for photography, and it's an old plantation. It's different than gardens. But Brook Green is I go every time. I'll be there in a couple of weeks. If anybody's going to be down that way in late March, let me know. I'd love to go shoot with you, so I'll be down there.
Lori, this was a fantastic presentation. I'll definitely share with you the chat, because there are a lot of nice notes in there for you. I want to thank you for doing this presentation for us, because you don't know me, and sometimes it's kind of like weird getting a request, but you jumped at it and you were so gracious to say yes, and I really appreciate it. This is like the best time of year for flowers. We're getting we're planting, we're watching them starting. The wildflowers are jumping up already here in Texas. It might be a little ways for you, but this was a perfect perfect timing to have you come in and do this presentation. And I think everybody got something out of it. And for that, I really appreciate it. You can connect with Lori through her website, LoriLangford.com, and on Instagram, look for her at photography_Lori. Our next meeting is on Thursday, April 6th, and Valerie Hoffman will be here to talk about soft focus photography in her presentation, Discover the Softer Side of Photography. Until next time, I hope that you get a chance to go out and explore with your camera and enjoy a little bit of spring weather. We'll see you again in April.